Hi everyone, I'm Sammy. I'm from Square Books and Square Books Junior. This is Middle Grade Madness, our middle grade panel for the pandemic. Yay! We're all excited. So with me, I have Gilbert Ford, James Bird, and Jess Redman. They're all middle grade authors. They all had books come out recently. So first, I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about their books, and then we're going to get started. I got some questions, and then y'all can ask some questions. So Gilbert, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Gilbert Ford, and my middle grade novel is called The Mysterious Messenger. It is about an 11-year-old girl named Maria who lives with her fake psychic mother who cons widows out of their inheritance. But Maria is keeping a big secret from her mother, and that is that she can really speak to a ghost named Edward. So one day, while they're in the middle of a seance, they con a widow. Edward comes to her and tells her to follow the widow home. There is a treasure hidden inside her apartment. So Maria has to disobey her mother and get away long enough to help the widow find her treasure and hopefully make some new friends in the process. So that's it.
Okay, James, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm James Bird, and my book is called The Brave, and it's about a half Native American boy named Colin who has a condition where if anyone speaks to him, instead of responding, he counts up all the letters in their sentence and has to blurt it out. And so deal with that his whole life, and he gets bullied at school for it. So his dad finally sends him to Minnesota to live with his mother, who he's never met. And that's kind of where the adventure starts.
Okay, all right, Jess.
I'm Jess Redman, and my book came out last Tuesday. It's called Quintessence, and it's the story of a girl named Alma Lucas, and she moves to a new town, and she starts having panic attacks. And then one day, she goes to this sort of curiosity shop / observatory in the center of the town, and she gets this sort of magical telescope. And that night, she sees a star fall out of the sky into her backyard. And in the middle of the star is what looks like a golden child. And so along with 3 friends, she has to find the 4 classical elements, earth, wind, water, and fire, to create the 5th element, which is quintessence, and send the star back into the sky. So it's a story with a lot of alchemy and astronomy and mental health issues with the anxiety. So that's the story.
Okay, well, those are very good. I feel like everyone's got a sense of what we're talking about now. To let you all know, we do have copies of all of these books with signed book plates. I'm going to leave y'all the link in the chat before this is over so you can order directly from us and get those signed copies because we know everyone loves those. So my first question, and James, if you want to start us off, is when did you know that you wanted to become a writer?
Well, I guess I've kind of always written. I started writing, I kind of had some learning disabilities as a kid. And so I would practice with I don't know if in The Brave, if anyone hasn't read it, some objects are used to promote your brain of thinking there's something else. So I would take crayons and my mom would use them, like saying, she would trick me into, oh, you're not writing, you're carving a sword into into the ground. So I would start with crayons, and pretty soon my brain started loving it. So crayons turned to marker, turned to pencil, turned to pen, turned to typing. Looking back, I've written my entire life, and it's so weird that it never clicked that that's what I want to do for the rest of my life, because I've written scripts, I've written comics, I've written plays, poems, everything, and I've never put it together of like, oh, I should be a writer,
Okay, Jess?
I have also pretty much always wanted to be a writer. I was a huge book nerd from the time I learned to read, and when I was a kid, I had those, marble-covered composition notebooks, and I would just fill them with stories. And That was pretty much my only hobby, and the only thing that I did like for fun, and the only thing I was like, oh, I'm really good at this, was writing. And so reading and writing have always been the things that I love and the things that I'm passionate about. I didn't like major in creative writing or follow that route for a career. I did some different things, and then eventually I became a therapist, but I always kind of knew that eventually I was going to try to become a writer. I was really going to try to do that thing that I'd always wanted to do. So it's been a dream come true for me, because that, you know, since I was so young, that's been my dream.
Okay, Gilbert, you want to finish up for us?
Sure. Okay, so like James, I pretty much been drawing since I could hold a crayon, and that was before I could write. So the art thing came first. Um, and when I was in middle school, I started writing more seriously, and in high school I wrote a lot. But then I went to art school and became an illustrator. And I didn't really get into really writing seriously until I needed to drum up more work for illustration. And that was like in 2005 or so, I started writing again. And then I eventually just went to grad school and got the writing degree and just, pursued it more full time. But yeah, for me, it was like, yeah, I didn't know you could do both. Like, I didn't know how you could also draw and illustrate at the same, for how you would be able to combine them until children's books came about. So that's it.
Okay,
I wish
actually,
cool.
what?
I said, I wish I could draw. I feel like that's the best combo, is when you're an author illustrator. Like, how cool is that your books are illustrated by you? It's so cool.
Thank you.
So that actually leads perfectly into our next question, which is, why did you choose to write for kids? Gilbert, if you want to start us off, go for it.
Okay. So I was an illustrator, and a lot of the people that I had gone to school with, well, a couple of my friends who were illustrators got jobs in children's publishing, and they started asking me if I wanted to do book covers. And I also my day job was creating educational toys. So I would draw and illustrate and design these toys, and it was just sort of something I did, and it just sort of melded into a career of illustration, and children's books. That's just, it sort of landed in my lap. Does that make sense?
Yes. Jess?
So I think initially when I was in my 20s, I took myself very seriously, and I thought I was going to write books for adults, and I thought they were going to be very, literary and very sort of hoity-toity. But I did a lot of writing, and I enjoyed it, but then I was actually expecting my first child, and I had this idea that just came to me actually in a dream about a character. And I was like, well, let me just try writing that for fun, because I was so busy. I was working, and I was, getting ready for this child. And so I was like, I'm just going to try it. And I just fell in love with the story and with the characters. And it really connected me back to the books that I loved the most, which were middle grade books. I read so much at that age, and I remember those books so well. They have such a place sort of in my heart and in the person that I became, that it was sort of a revelation for me that, oh, I should do this. I should write for that age group that I feel so connected to, and that really flows so easily for me. And so that was a good shift. That was a good move for me to decide, like, okay, I don't have to write something that's going to be so serious and heavy, and I don't have to take myself so seriously. I can do something that I love and that I feel passionate about.
And James, you're a screenwriter, and this is your first book, correct?
Yes.
How has that transition been into writing for movies and then writing for kids?
It's pretty interesting, because I actually find out how much easier screenwriting is. Because books, it's an entire world, and screenwriting is just A, B, C, D, E. Like, you just hit points. But yeah, for books, you can go everywhere.
And what made you want to write a book for kids?
I think because kids matter the most. I think kids, we're all kids, like we're adults and we pretend to be professional. We pretend to know more than we know. But when it comes down to sitting down and wanting to read a story, that's exactly what kids do. That's all these adults. They're just becoming a kid again. So I hit it at the source. I want to tell kid, like, if you ask anybody what's your favorite story of all time, they'll tell you something that from their childhood, or what did they learn the most, their lessons, or how to become a better person. It's something that they grabbed from their childhood. So I want to be a part of all these kids' childhoods, and I want to be an active limb in the future for these kids. I mean, kids matter the most. They're going to be the people that are running this world, and I want to put good stories in their heads, and I want to teach them compassion and morals, and it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to I want to be a part of their life, whether I meet them or not. They'll meet something that I did.
I love that answer. And you talk about, like, you're teaching about compassion, and something that's a thread in all of your books is that you all tackle really tough topics, from OCD to anxiety to death to abandonment. These are like heavy subjects, but what I liked about all of your books is that it never felt too heavy for me to bear, even as an adult, and so I felt like it was still really accessible for kids. Why did y'all choose to write about topics that are so tough? And Jess, if you want to start, that would be great.
Sure. I think when I've been asked this question before, kind of the most common response a lot of times is because this is what kids are going through. I mean, these are issues that are happening for kids every day. And I think there's also another level of these are topics that kids should be aware of, even if they're not personally going through it, and something that they may go through in the future. I think a lot of children's literature, I think a lot of what it does is sort of lay the groundwork and give sort of the tools and the ways to think about and the perspective to help kids when they do come across situations that are difficult or that they weren't expecting. It's almost like a training ground to learn how to deal with things like that. You see characters being strong or being brave or doing something that's difficult and persevering. So I think that that's one of the functions of Kidlit. And then at another level, like I said, kids are going through this. So my book has a character who has an anxiety disorder, and I've been able to do a lot of fun research for me, because I'm a therapist and I like these things, into anxiety and into sort of how it's affecting kids and how it's affecting kids right now. And adults, and it's estimated right now that nearly a third of people will have an anxiety disorder at some point in their lifetime. So it's something that up to a third of people at some point are going to go through. And I think that, as a therapist, I'm really into kids sort of getting those emotional tools and coming to understand themselves at this younger age. And so that then when something like that comes up, they're able to manage it. And that sounds very clinical, and it's not something that I thought about when I was writing the book. Like, I want to make sure that children have coping skills or whatever, but it sort of organically weaves itself into stories, I think, because we're typically writing about characters overcoming things and facing something that's bigger than themselves. So I don't know if that made sense, but that was a long ramble to say. I think that it helps kids because if they are facing it or if they're going to face it in the future, and to have compassion for people who are facing it now.
And as someone with an anxiety disorder, I wish there had been a book like Quintessence when I was a kid, so I could have gotten diagnosed sooner, because I had no idea that, like, you could have an anxiety disorder as a child. I definitely did.
And I've heard that from a lot of people. And I was a super anxious kid. I know it would have meant a lot to me. So, so that's a whole other piece of it, is that I think for me, I take from what did I need to hear when I was that age? And it definitely would have made me feel seen and given me language to talk about my own emotional journey had I read about that in a book. So.
Gilbert, Maria deals with some not so great home life issues. Do you want to expand on why you wrote about that?
Those are just the kinds of books I read as a kid. I didn't want to read about a kid that had a perfect family life, because that just didn't interest me. I kind of wanted to see them in something horrible, and I could experience it from a safe distance, and kind of live through them, but close the book once it was over and go back to my normal life. Yeah. So I think as a kid, yeah, those are the kind of books I like to read, so that's why I did it.
It's very like series of unfortunate events-esque, and I was like,
Yeah.
here for that. So James, your main character deals with, I believe, a form of OCD, and there's a lot of heavy stuff in yours. Do you want to dive into it a little bit?
Sure. Like how Jess said, because kids are already going through this, and kids are aware of it, and so I agree with that. And I chose to write about it for the ones that haven't been exposed to it yet or introduced to it yet, because like I'll just pick like death, right? A kid experiencing death for the first time could be traumatic, could be really sad, and that's going to influence their perception of death for the rest of their life, their first grab at it. And my hope was to be some kids' first grab at it. So like if they haven't experienced a family member dying and they read my book, if a family member does die, they'll kind of connect some sort of good memory to it too. Like, oh, I know of death from a book I love, and they found beauty in it, so maybe should I search for beauty in it? Should I search for understanding? Should I think about this like the characters? Should I tackle it, or and face it, or should I try to ignore it? Like I want to be the help, without shoving it down their throat. I want to be like, hey, remember when this happened in this story? Like I want people to look back and be, oh, okay, there's so many, because no one knows how to deal with stuff. There's no right answer for everything. So if a kid does come across a situation, maybe some kid I'll never meet, growing up in a place I've never been, will resort back. Sorry, are you there? Oh. We'll resort back to a triggering effect. Sorry. And it will trigger a memory, and hopefully I could help in a way, be a part of how they deal with it.
And I think the thing that's important about writing about death in children's books is that it doesn't feel entirely hopeless. And I think you do a really great job of that. There's some hope in the grief that's in The Brave. So another fun topic, we'll switch over a little bit. I feel like at the root of all three of these books is friendships and kids who feel like outsiders are finding their own community. Can you explain kind of how you used this theme and why you used it? And Jess, if you want to go first.
Sure. I think, I really love stories where characters need each other. That's a big theme that I find myself writing about a lot, is this idea that we can't do everything, and we can't be everything, and that we need help from other people, and that we need other people to sort of fill in spaces of our personalities that our lives wouldn't be as full or as rich without. So in my first book, I have sort of this unlikely friendship that turns into a trio. I have a book coming out next May that has this group of 4 kids that sort of end up complementing each other and going on journeys. And in Quintessence, there are these 4 kids who very, literally need each other to create this 5th element. So each of the kids sort of represents a different element. And I think it's definitely a fun trope for middle grade, is that these kids who seem like they don't have anything in common, but then actually, they really do, and they need each other, and they come together, and that makes for a really fun read, because you want to figure out why. Why do these kids go together? Why do they need each other? How can they work together? And so that's just always been a trope that I've been drawn to, and I find myself putting it in my books again and again and again. And I think for my own life, that's been an important theme, is figuring out how I can be interdependent with other people, and how I can grow from other people, and how they can challenge me and help me to become a better person with the larger community as well. So I find that coming up in my life, I find it coming up in my books, and I think it is a really fun way to sort of share that message with kids.
Gilbert?
Yes. Friendship is always a common theme with middle grade novels, because kids are learning about this at this age. The Mysterious Messenger was actually going to be called Kindred Spirits. And I wrote the first 20 pages. And I remember I got to the point where Maria met the boy that lived upstairs. And that was it, 20 pages. And I decided to name it Kindred Spirits, because she could talk to spirits, but she was going to eventually have friendships. And because I liked the title so much, I kind of just made that be the theme of the book, and thinking that they would just tie together well. And they ended up changing the title to The Mysterious Messenger, but the friendship's done. So there you go.
And I like the spirits because, ghosty theme. I really like Kindred Spirits. I kind of wish that was the title.
Oh,
Yeah.
But I like The Mysterious Messenger too.
It's very good. James, do you want to talk about the friendship in your novel?
Yeah. I think at the core of probably everything, friendship is the only real thing that matters in anything. Like, you can't have a good marriage without a good friendship. You can't be a good parent and not be a good, like a really good friend to your kid. You can't read a good book unless that book actually becomes a good friend of yours. You want to hang out with it all the time. You want to read it. So I think friendship is the most important thing. And I kind of, in the book, wanted it to be where kids actually learn how to become their own best friend as well. Like Colin and Orenda, the boy and the girl, as they become best friends, and so close, we're actually seeing two versions of each character compete. It's like the Colin that is afraid to speak up and thinks that it's a curse is actually meeting the Colin that that wants to become confident, wants to see it as a gift, wants to believe Orenda and the parents and his mom. And these two, one never dies, one never leaves. You'll always, as people, will always have both of them. And I think you reach an arc and you reach the point of the story that you want to tell and you're satisfied with, is when those two sides become best friends. And that's how all of us are today, is like our past and who we want to be just hanging out all the time.
I love that. I love the idea of like your past self and your future self becoming friends. So my favorite thing about all of your books is magic, because I love magic. And I love that there's just like a little sprinkling of magic in each book. We've got ghosts, we've got butterflies, we've got fallen stars, we've got it all. Gilbert, do you want to talk about the magic in your book?
Where did it come from? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So the story came about because a friend of mine is a photographer, and she photographs mediums in Lilydale. And she invited me over to her home for a seance. And the woman was from England, and we were all sitting around, and she told us that there was another man in her life, and that she had to tell her husband that there was another man in her life, and it was Elvis Presley. So, you know, we're all sitting there like, oh my goodness. It's like, so how do you speak to Elvis? Like, does he show up and do a song or whatever? And she ended up putting a piece of paper on the table and then her hand on top of it and then balanced the pen between her knuckles. And she kind of moved her hand over the paper and she made everyone be quiet. So we're all just kind of watching, like, what's she doing? And when she was done, she had a letter from the spirit of Elvis Presley. And she read it to us. Do you want to know what it said?
Yes.
He said, well, he just said, I want you to know that there's a really is an afterlife. You better believe it, Elvis Presley. So that was, but when I wrote the story, I didn't want it to be Elvis. I wanted the spirit to be Edward because it sounded more believable. And it's like, for me, Elvis was just too outrageous. But Maria, that's her magic, is that she can do automatic writing in the same way that this medium had done. And that and he writes messages for her to find the treasure, like little hints to hear on her journey. So there you go.
I love that story very much. James, do you want to talk about the magic in your book?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Native American, Ojibwe. A lot of their beliefs and a lot of their culture is based in magic, what we would call magic. A lot of animal symbolism, a lot of spirits, a lot of how everything is connected. And I guess in my book, that's what I would call magic, is realizing how everything is connected. You know, if I am talking to a cloud, you know, someone would say I'm crazy. But if I'm talking to a cloud and I'm like, oh, the cloud says it's about to rain, and then it rains, that crazy is now magic. You know, like, oh, that's magic. But in truth, it's probably a language and a way of communication that we always had. We just forgot about it. You know, like nature. Nature is magic. We see magic every day. You know, we see it. Sometimes we pretend we don't. Sometimes we chalk it up to that's the way it is. But you know, I experience magic all the time, and in my book, it is. I don't think you'll find one chapter without magic. You know, like there's magic everywhere in it. And by the end, my goal is to make magic so common that you're able to close the book, go outside, and be like, oh yeah, that's magic. Magic.
Okay, you're frozen. Did we lose James?
We lost him.
Are you trying to get him back?
Magic.
It was the magic. James, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can't see you.
See, it's magic. I'm stuck in the phone.
Oh no! It's really just bizarre timing. Okay, well, while James tries to get back on, Jess, Fallen Stars, or like my favorite trope. It's very Stardust. It's very House Moving Castle. James is back. We did it. Jess, talk about your star magic.
Yes. So I had such a fun time with this book because I got to combine a lot of things that I love. I love magic and I love stars and I got to do a lot of science. So my favorite books are books with magic. I've always, I love fantasy. I particularly like, kind of like we all did, I like contemporary stories with the sprinkling of magic. I love bringing that sense of wonder and sort of that next level of what could be to our everyday world. So it's almost like you just sort of turn the volume up on our everyday life and see what else is there that we weren't hearing. So yes, I do have Fallen Stars. I live near the beach and I love going out and like putting a blanket out and watching when there's meteor showers. So I had this image in my head of a star falling and a girl standing on her roof watching it. And so that's sort of how the story began. And I kind of built it out around that image. And I got to do so much fun research into alchemy, because there is an alchemy. There's a fifth element that's called quintessence. So I got to research Paracelsus, and in some versions of the story, there's way more magic. Like the volume was turned up like super high. So there were like mermaids, and there were air sprites, and there were salamanders coming out of the fire, and there were so all the elements have their sort of magical creature that goes with it. But then that didn't quite work for the story, so I had to turn the magic down a little bit. And then for the Fallen Stars, for a while there were chapters where you got the point of view of the star that falls. But that started to get a little too E.T. Like I had chapters where like Alma was like putting makeup over her so that she wouldn't shine too much, and like dressing her in her mom's old clothes and like riding around on a bicycle around town. And I was like, okay, that's too E.T. That's not what I'm going for. So it was fun though. I got to just play with these different magic systems and different elements of things that I really enjoy, and figure out how they all could mesh together and blend together in a story that made sense, and that was fun. So it's for me, that's my favorite part, is following sort of my train of imagination and getting to build out the world and figure out the magic system and how things are going to go together. So I had a blast doing that with this story.
Yeah, and doing anything with the elements is so fun because you can match them up so nicely to people.
Yes, I love that, because I love, like sorting into houses and sorting into cabins and Camp Half-Blood. Like we love doing that and thinking about who would you be and where would you go with. And I made like a little character quiz on my website so people can like see which element they would be. So it was just a lot of fun to sort of follow those trains of thought.
Okay, well, friends, if y'all have any questions, you can submit them in the chat. I'm going to ask about one more. I might ask two. We'll see how many questions y'all have. My first question is, what was your favorite book when you were a kid? James, if you want to start us off.
So my favorite book was a book called Chester Cricket's New Home, and it was a children's book. And the reason why is, so growing up, I had a really, really, really hard time reading, because, so you read The Brave, so you know what he does with letters. Well, I did something like that. I didn't need to blurt it out and have it in my head, but everything written down, I would dissect all the letters growing up. I would take apart these letters from this word and make a new word and see how different of a sentence I could make from what the original sentence was. So my brain constantly did that, and it was really hard. And my mom got me a book called Chester Cricket's New Home because I could only read about a couple sentences in before my brain would take over. And that book, it took me 2 years, maybe a little bit more than 2 years to finish that book. So forever, that's like the book that I always take around. I'm always with, because that was like the first time that I did it. I finished it. I read a real book.
You never forget your first book. It's so special. Jess, do you want to talk about your favorite book as a child?
My favorite book, let's see, still have my Wrinkle in Time. That was my favorite book. I read this book dozens of times. I'm a big rereader. I always have been. So this was like my comfort book. And when I was a kid, when I started writing, I basically wrote like Wrinkle in Time, straight up fan fiction for like many years. It was like a girl named Peg, travels through the universe, no relation to Meg Murray. But this is a book that when I decided to write for kids again, this is a book that I sort of like flashed back to. And I was like, this book made a big difference for me. And Meg's bravery and the fact that she wasn't perfect and that she, struggled to deal with her emotions. And I was like, I want to write a book like that. So, really all of Madeleine L'Engle's books, but definitely A Wrinkle in Time made a huge impact on me.
Meg Murray's heroine for the ages. I love her.
I love Meg Murray. She has my heart. I love her.
Gilbert, what was your favorite book as a child?
Oh goodness. I loved Wrinkle in Time. It made me think, but I think I gravitated mostly towards Louis Satcher's Sideways Story for Wayside School, and then Anything by Roald Dahl. So I guess the Sideways Stories would have been my favorite one as a kid. And yeah.
No, those are great. We still sell those a lot as a bookseller. I can confirm.
I can see a lot of Roald Dahl influence in your writing too, Gilbert. That's so definitely neat to hear you say that. When I was reading it, I was like, well, this would totally be like a Roald Dahl-esque home environment. Definitely not the most ideal of home environments.
Okay, so Madison would like to know what everyone is working on right now. Y'all just tell me what you're working on. I don't know. Whoever wants to start.
So I can go. I have a book that's coming out in May. Quintessence was supposed to come out in May, so now it's kind of interesting. I had to wait a little while for Quintessence, but now just in 9 months I'll have another book coming out. It's called The Adventure Is Now, and it's a story about a boy who is sort of obsessed with this video game that has him sort of traveling on this island full of all these different plants and animals and environments, and then he has to go and live with his environmental researcher uncle on an actual island, and he starts having this adventure that sort of mirrors the video game that he was playing, and in the meantime he is finding out these sort of fantastical creatures and solving clues and hints that were left by the discoverer of the island, and making unlikely friendships. And so it's a book that was a lot of fun for me to write, and it's going to have like a field guide in the back with illustrations of the creatures and little riddles to solve. So I'm super, super excited about it. It's definitely my most lighthearted book so far, but I think it also has a lot of heart to it. So that's what I'm doing, copy edits now. So
I'm so excited. That sounds great. James, what are y'all working on?
Right now, I am. I have a book coming out, The Chief and the Thief. I haven't even started the revisions yet, but that's going to be my book number 2, and that's a Own Voices Native American story that I'm really excited about.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I love the title. It's very alliterative. Gilbert, are you working on anything?
Yes, so a book that I illustrated is coming out in January called From Here to There, and it's about an 80 or 90 page book about inventors. And then as far as writing goes, I've turned in the rough draft for a middle grade novel, the book 2 that goes with this one. They're standalone books, but it's called The Cutting Edge right now. And it's about a boy named Saber who works for his dad in the knife sharpening van in New York. So in New York, they have these vans, and then you can actually take your knife and have it sharpened, and it's been around since the 40s. So the kid's totally embarrassed by it, and he wants a cell phone, but his father won't give him one. And then one day his father is missing, and he finds his dad's cell phone and realizes that he wasn't at all who he thought he was, and he has to find his father. So there you go.
Ooh, I like the knife sharpening thing. I had never heard of that.
Yeah.
Okay, Jeff has some questions. This is from Jeff. I run a writing camp for grades 4 to 9 each summer before COVID, and a literacy conference for teachers. Do you Skype with groups? Is that a service that any of y'all provide? Is there someone we could get him to get in contact with?
Yes. I just do visits. Just contact me on my website and then email me, and yeah, I'll write it in the comments.
Okay, yeah, and Jeff, you can always email me and I can pass on info as well. Madison's on board. You can contact Madison. All right. D. Ham wants to know, what kind of scenes are hardest for you to write? Gilbert, you want to go first? You're already on my screen.
Okay, so the only scene, I wrote it, but it's a kissing scene. Like, it's just something that dreaded because I never really wanted to do it. And so I finally wrote it with this new novel, and we'll see. I'm a little bit nervous, but
Interesting book, Gilbert.
yeah, it's much, I don't know. So I don't know if I got it right, but we'll see.
I was gonna say, I think James is the only one with a kissing scene in the books we're talking about. His is great. It's really
Thank you.
James, what scenes are hardest for you to write?
I think the hardest scenes for me to write are actually also kind of in a way my favorite scenes. And they're when a character leaves, like saying goodbye to a character. Like, I love the kiss fighting, the fun banter scenes. Those are all fun. But when it's the day that you got to say goodbye to a character, knowing that character is probably not going to be you're not going to be writing that character tomorrow or the next day. Like, that's probably the hardest, because it's like real life. Like, oh, I didn't get to say this, and oh, I didn't get, like, I miss. Oh, and Madison's on there. Hi, Madison. Okay, but yeah, those are the hardest for me, is saying goodbye to a character, and they're my favorite because every time I'm writing, you could look back and be like, oh, that was so fun with that person. That was so fun.
Okay, Jess, what scenes are hardest for you to write?
I always think, like, I wish I could just be a writer who writes the beginning of books and the endings of books. Like that, those are my two favorite parts to write. I love in the beginning because sort of anything is possible. Anything could really happen in the story, and you get to figure it out. And I always spend a really long time on beginnings and read them over and over, but I love it. That's one of my favorite things to do. And then I love the endings because I like to write books that have sort of almost like a slow burn type thing and then at the end, a lot of things happen like kind of quickly, and there's a lot of emotional parts, and there's a lot of, things that you've been waiting for that finally happen. So I love writing both of those sort of bookend parts, but middles can be a bit of a slog. So they're not hard as in emotionally hard or hard to figure out. I sort of know what's going to happen, but it's hard because I want to get to the good parts, the more emotionally meaty, exciting parts. So sometimes the middle slog is not my favorite.
I think that's fair. Y'all, that is our time. Thank you so much, Gilbert, Jess, and James. This was so wonderful. For my friends in the audience, we are going to have a recording of this up on YouTube if you missed anything. And you can buy signed copies of all the books at squarebooks.com. Anything to add, authors?
No, thank you for this.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
And thank you for having us. This was really wonderful and fun.
Well, hopefully we'll get y'all actually in the store sometime. I've requested all of you before, so it's only a matter of time. But when we have in-person meetings, I hope y'all get to come to Square Books. Thank you so much, everyone. And that's it from us. Have a great night, everybody. Bye.